Welcome back to another video about the best revenge stories of Reddit. If you like the video, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button, it really helps a lot. Thanks a lot and enjoy today's stories. Note: this happens in Sweden, where there's no at-will employment. Once an employee has passed the initial 6-month probation period, you can't fire them without a cause, which also requires an established paper trail. So, my friend's father, since retired, was a mechanical engineer. He was around 55 when this happened and very experienced in his field. In fact, he had some skill sets that were close to unique to the extent that you might be able to replicate them, but at extreme costs. We're talking multiple people from multiple companies from multiple countries taking weeks if not months to get up to speed with specific projects to do the same things. He was also a no-bullshit kind of guy who did his job, did it well, but also pointed out problems and expected others to point out problems to him. He was extremely solution-oriented and had no time for office politics or keeping a positive attitude at work. Basically, your everyday grumpy older engineer who really knew his thing and always ready to help if you asked, but not very forthcoming in team-building exercises and so on. He also ran his own business on the side, doing minor projects and so on. As was required by his employer, he had reported this and was sure to not cause any conflicts of interests, so his employer knew and accepted this. He was considered a valuable employee and got several awards, that he cared little for, but anyway, during his many years with this employer. By all accounts, they paid him well, respected his knowledge and accommodated his style, and he returned the favor by working very hard and making sure to mentor younger and newly employed engineers to make them effective co-workers. Then his firm was acquired by a larger firm, and a new management team installed. Initially, everyone was promised that things would remain the same. But with the new management came a new office culture. The new management pressured for unpaid overtime, for a more American corporate culture with cheering and clapping and so on. He considered it extremely cringe and refused to participate. His status as a long-standing and knowledgeable employee kept him safe for some time, before the new management realized that resistance to the new culture centered around him and started pressuring him to play along. When he did not, they turned increasingly hostile, realizing that he held a lot of soft power in the company, having mentored a large percentage of the engineers and resistance to their leadership centering around him. They started ordering him to work overtime. He answered that he was on time with his projects and that if they had identified an emergency requiring overtime, they would have to bring it up with the union to negotiate the overtime and make sure it was an actual emergency. The contract with the union said no overtime unless in an emergency. They tried to force him to participate in the cheering and clapping by making it mandatory for him to attend and yelling at him to participate, and he did, but so unenthusiastically that the event turned even more cringe and people started laughing. The workday turned more and more hostile, and he knew that things would come to head sooner or later. Being an experienced engineer and knowing how to document things, he already had his ducks in a row. Then it finally happened. They caught him answering an email for his side business on his work laptop, brought him in and fired him on the spot for theft of company resources. He sat at the conference table and looked the 3 managers in their eyes, one after the other, and asked, "Are you sure you want to do this?" They all said yes. "Are you really sure you want to do this?" He was escorted to his desk by security to leave his phone, his badge and his computer at the desk and then escorted out. Once out of the building, he phoned his union representative, who immediately cancelled the firing, claiming there was no just cause, which meant that it would go to the labor board for arbitration. You see, the company had an IT policy that it was okay to use the company laptop for personal business, including a side business, as long as you were on a break and compliant with IT security protocols, and the company was aware of and had approved his side business. And he was on a break. Of course, he had his declaration of a side business, signed by his former manager, and the IT policy available and sent both to the union representative. Then he called his lawyer and asked him to send the pre-prepared cease and desist on 2 patents he held, patents that were not that significant and nothing he could make any serious money out of since they were mostly for very specific things used by the solutions he designed and used at his employers, but still as that he had brought with him into the employment and allowed the employer to use in exchange for a slightly higher pay, all duly documented in his contract, of course. Then he went home for some vacation and tending his side business. He was always a man to prepare and had enough money saved up to last him for a good time, to the extent that he considered retiring entirely. My friend said he had 2 job offers from competitors that had looked to sniping him for some time within the week, basically as soon as they learned he was available. He was gracious, but declined, but offered them to consult with his side business, now that he had the time, which they eagerly accepted, at twice the hourly rate he had made at his earlier employers. His colleagues started ringing the day after for advice, since the projects he had managed could not go on without him. He was perfectly polite, but denied any information and help, saying he had left everything he had with management and to contact them, as he was no longer employed there. Several clients that phoned his private number were told the same thing. Since his private number was not on a public registry, he suspected that both colleagues and clients spent some time and or money to find it. It took 2 weeks before a manager phoned him and asked things. He politely declined to answer, got yelled at and replied with something like "I am sorry, you must have mistaken me for someone who works for you," and hung up. This happened a few times, and the next week HR phoned him and stated the firing had been a mistake and he was welcome back to his job. He again politely declined, saying that he awaited the labor board's decision, but until then he was happy to consult for them. At 6 times his hourly pay, after taxes and administrative costs, of course. After a few days of wrangling and trying to negotiate, they had to accept. And then he sprung the patent issue on them, forcing them to pay for those too. Less than 2.5 weeks after being fired he was back at his desk. After roughly 3 months, the firing came to the labor board. The employer stated that they believed they had handled the issue correctly, but were still willing to offer my friend's father his position back, in the interest of goodwill and reconciliation. My friend's father and the union simply stated that he was now employed elsewhere, his own company, and no longer available. The labor board ruled in my friend's father's and the union's favor, and he got the normal damages, 3 months pay damage and 24 months pay severance package, including pension and of course the lawyer costs of the union paid by the employer. According to my friend, her father continued to work there until he retired, working 20 hours or so per week and 10 to 15 hours for other companies, making a pretty penny, continuing to charge them 3 times what he charged their competitors as an asshole tax. The managers were not fired, but they were moved into their own group apart from the rest of the department when it came to bonus calculations, and the costs of her father's consultancy fees and the costs of the labor board arbitration were budgeted there, meaning they were constantly over budget and thus ineligible for bonuses for several years, which was a decent percentage of the incentives at that company, making at least one of them quit. My friend also said her father usually met any management complaints with a big shit-eating grin and "What are you going to do? Fire me?" after that. In the next story, Op destroys a real estate agency, because they stole his security deposit. So, background. Around Thanksgiving 2017, my wife's company offered her a fantastic promotion, which she accepted even though it meant moving across the state by January 1st. The month of December was insanity: list and sell the house, find a short-term rental which would accept 4 pets, pack, move, etc. A lot of whiskey magically disappeared, but I got it all done and we moved into our rental house and all was well. We bought our new home and moved in. The rental lease officially ended on April 1st. The property manager followed the state laws correctly so far and we were told we'd get the $1,800 owed for our security deposit back by May. Spoiler alert, it never came. I spent the next 4 months going back and forth with the property manager and hearing "It's coming, we never got your paperwork, blah blah." I got sick of this and got 2 different lawyers involved and sent them official demand letters. I also filed a formal complaint with the State Division of Real Estate against their license. The PM kept telling the state investigators that they would pay us back, but nothing ever happened. I didn't want to formally sue via our lawyer because he charges $300/hour and it's all up front. I was hesitant to go to small claims court because it's a $5,000 max in our state and the damages we're legally owed are 3x the $1,800 deposit, which puts us over that cap, so I'd have to give up on some of the damages we're legally entitled to seek, eat roughly $500 total in fees, and then go through that whole process for the next year, and assuming we won the judgment, then go through the collection process for another year or 2. An option, one we'd win, but a big pain in my ass. So this is where the ProRevenge comes in. It was initially petty, say their website is shittypropertymanager.com. I bought shittypropertymanager.co for $12 and posted all of my screenshots and info about their theft and bullshit for the world to see, and then I bombed it all over their business Facebook pages as well as the personal pages for the main partners in their Yelp page. I got a kick out of it. They took their pages down. Petty revenge wins, right? My little website caused a bigger boom than I anticipated. Basically, this PM has 2 principal agents in charge and a broker. One of the agents is married to the broker. Beneath them, they had 5 realtors. I sent my new website to them all, everywhere I could. Turns out the partner who isn't married to the broker had no idea that the broker and his wife were stealing money from the PM company. Their realtors had no idea, either. Two of them quit immediately, and one reached out to me to let me know why she quit and that she was going to a new broker. But the other principal of the company was mortified. She asked me to leave her name out of it, take the stuff down, etc., and I just politely but coldly replied that hey, your business partners, broker stole my money and I can back everything I'm saying with documents, not my problem. She promised she'd get things resolved, and for the first time in 10 months, the broker started answering my emails. We worked out a deal and they're now paying us $200 per month until December, which will cover the amount owed plus the extra for our legal fees. The first check came last week. It actually bounced, but I made them send me a cashier's check and they have to send cashier's checks going forward, so we did get our first installment. I've also learned that the state investigation has been turned over to the state's legal department and the broker and his wife will likely lose their license. The state investigator said they had multiple complaints against them, but I was the most thorough and had the most documentation against them, so our complaint was a big reason they had the ammo to push it to the legal team. So all told, my shitty little website ended up costing them 40% of their real estate team, resulted in them removing their business FB listings, pushed the investigation into their license over to a state legal team, still ongoing, and resulted in them having to finally start paying us not only the $1,800 we're owed but the legal fees I spent on top of it. Oh, and that bounced check? I made them send me a certified check for $12 to cover the bank fee for that, too. All other checks were good. Then October hits. They don't send a certified check, but since they'd been good all year and we were nearing the end, I deposited it. It shouldn't be a shock that it bounced, so I emailed them to get this fixed. The property manager says sorry, I goofed, since we only owe you $600 I'll send you one check now for $312, half plus the bounced check fee, and the rest in December. I agree. Weeks pass, nothing. So I reach back out in early December and finally get a check, but it's only for $200. I was fed up with their games and with this bullshit hitting almost the 2-year mark, so I stuck to the deadline and said I expected the remaining $412 by 12/15. The 15th comes and goes, so I email again on the 16th, and what do you know? Radio silence. Totally ignored. So I waited until the 23rd, right before Christmas, and just sent them a short email saying exactly that the website was going back up and I'd resume legal action since they decided not to honor our new written agreement. The partner who got the repayment process started in the first place finally had enough and snapped and said she couldn't deal with this over Christmas and that she'd repay me herself to be done with this. I received our final check, for $412, today. After 2 years of this bullshit, it's finally over and I have all of our security deposit returned plus some to cover my legal fees and certified mail costs. The total fallout on their end, 3 of their 5 realtors ended up leaving based on my website. They had to repay me everything they owed and I didn't let them off the hook, and I just used the state tool to look up their real estate license and the license hearing did not go their way and their license is on probation with 11 complaints filed against it, which will all require repayment and remediation, with the most recent complaint being an internal administrative complaint based on my actions, which will likely result in them losing their license altogether in 2020, although that's just an assumption, but a likely one since the administrative complaint is the most recent and is wholly open. That's where I figured it would end in late 2019, with 11 open complaints on their license and the state just giving them slaps on the wrist. I figured it was as good as we could expect. Tonight I got curious and bored and hopped on the state license portal to see what had happened. When we left off in 2019, they had the 11 open complaints, 10 of which were from renters and 1 from the state itself. That was the one which had me curious. The state closed out my case and 9 others in June of 2019, which put their license on probation for a year, gave them courses to take, and some whopping fines which were basically nothing. I don't know how they fucked up, but the state complaint got taken higher and into this year, and as of July 2020, their license has been completely revoked. Not just the business license for XX real estate but the personal license for the asshole who dicked me around, too. I got my money back and they're out of business partly because of me? I will take high tea. In the next story, a defense lawyers kept stealing ops trash in hopes of making his aunt, who was raped by her doctor, look like she was getting around and wanted it. They placed something else in the trash. Many moons ago, I was about 10ish, my aunt was a victim of rape while she was getting a routine surgery from her doctor. Needless to say, things got really messed rather quickly. Now, we don't have a lot of money, so the doctors obviously lawyered up to the teeth and they were trying to dig up anything they could find to paint my aunt in a bad light. She'd get her one lawyer and soldiered on. A few months into the lawsuit we noticed random cars kept stealing all of our trash, so she hired a private eye and found it was the defense lawyer's doing. Now, their cars were pretty nice. It was always a Range Rover or a black BMW, possible 7 Series because it was quite large, that would pull up and dump the entire contents of the trash in the trunk and speed off. This was unsettling to say the least, so my aunt and mom hatched a brilliant plan. There were 4 cats in the house, so we had a rather large supply cat piss and shit at our disposal. We simply saved up enough of this until the trash was about 3/4 full of straight-up litter. Oh, not bagged either. Just right into the can. It was then topped off with random shredded documents. It looked like a jackpot of a find, and ton of smell-good stuff to help hide the stink. The next trash day, like clockwork, they showed up in the black BMW and 2 people quickly picked up the can and dumped the entire contents in the trunk. They were furious and started loosing their shit at the end of the driveway. To top it all off, my aunt walked outside with a cup of coffee, waved and said good morning all cheerful like. They sped off and we never saw them again. She ended up winning the case about a year later.